Good evening and welcome back to another QSL podcast. I am Redsniper 23 and joining me tonight is special guest and co-host Justen. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back on the podcast. I think I did about 2 or 3 last season, and I'm ready to do my first one this season. How you been, Red Sniper?
Doing okay. Life getting a little hectic, you know how it is, but you know, doesn't mean that we can't have some fun playing Smite. Enjoying the QSL. Season 4 has been very interesting so far, completing 2 weeks already into week 3, nearing the halfway point of the season. And I don't know about you, but I am getting absolutely hyped for this. Every week meaning so much. We know that no matter what happens, that every single game has its place because you never know how that seeding is going to hit for playoffs. And so trying to make sure that you're going to make it and you're going to have the sort of the preferential treatment and the teams you're going to face going to be very interesting. But week 1 was kind of a clash. We kind of had some teams filter through, figure out how to, kind of mesh together. Some teams came into the season. There were a couple of teams, one especially in amateurs, that um, had been playing together for a while and just kind of picked up where they left off, played really well. But we're seeing players that are kind of familiar with the QSL now on new teams playing together. And we're seeing how that dynamic is really working for Season 4 now. That being said, let's get into our review of
Well,
week.
actually,
Oh, yeah, go
actually,
right
I would
ahead.
love to point out, especially because being in the middle of it, it doesn't really feel like it's midway through the season already. Well, next week will be midway through the season, but I've
Uh huh.
loved what QSL has done, adapted, making a third division, but shortening each division by one extra team. It just makes it shorter. Actually allows for more players to play, and then also it makes it a bit more competitive. Though, like last season, I know in majors, just personally, it really seemed like it was just two teams gunning for the top, but you see 3, 4 teams that really are competitive with each other. Even the bottom two aren't really that bad, and we really don't know what the has to offer just because it's only week 2 and week 3 next week will answer a little bit more questions, but I'm really excited and really love what's going on right now in the QSL.
Mm-hmm. And again, taking a look at what has happened so far in the QSL, because yeah, I mean, being a player in the QSL now, last season, we said that mods couldn't be players. We didn't want our teams to affect decisions that we made or anything like that. We realized that you know what, there's always going to be that inherent little bit of bias, but you got to set that to the side and say, okay, what's better for the league as a whole? How do we make sure that decisions that are made are fair and balanced? And so mods are being allowed to play. I myself am allowed to play, but of course, I'm in that amateur division, yeah, as rightfully so. Um, but we'll talk about some of the shifts that have happened in rosters later. But let's get into our week 2 review. Well, sort of week 1 review because we kind of flew through that kind of stuff in week 1. So why don't we take a look real quick, just a quick review of week 1. Because when the first episode came out, it was a little weird. We put out the first episode before all of the games had been played. So taking a look back at week 1 in the majors, the Frost Wolves took down the Emperors 2-1, the Reapers 2-1 over the V-Bakas, and the King's Court Dukes 2-0 over the Apes. The Miners, Frost Foxes, beat the Rockhoppers 2-1. The Ferrymen had to reschedule their game against the Meow Lovers, so look for that one to be played later on in the season. And the King's Court Barons 2-0'd Lions Pride from the Zoo. In the amateur division, you had the Frost Pups 2-0 over the Adelis. A little bit of chaos happening in that team, and but the Adelis look pretty good now. They're starting to get their feet under them, but again, had to go through that rocky start. The Serbs dropping the set 1-2 against the V Cat Girls, and then the King's Court Knights 2-0ing the Cutie Koalas in week 1. But, that's kind of our review. Let's move on to the next one. And this week, there's 9 total games, 3 in each division, and a third of the games are rescheduled this week. So sorry we're not going to be able to bring as intensive coverage this week as we normally would, but at least it's not like last season where almost every single game was rescheduled, and I think it was like week
Yes.
2 or week 3.
I think it was week 3. I think every game besides one got rescheduled for week 3, and everybody was rushing towards like week 8, and I believe the bye week 9 before the playoffs to get all those games played, especially the Dragons.
Oh, the Archon Dragons were just crazy. They were supposed to play like 5 games in 2 weeks or 3 weeks,
Yeah,
something like that.
I
It
think
was
it's 5
absolutely
set in
crazy.
2 weeks, and they got a
Yeah.
lot of them in. I think they got 3 or 4 in, so good, shout out to them. But I guess we're in week 2 of season 4, no longer living in the past, season 3.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But let's start with week 2 in the major leagues. So real quick here. Sorry, as I note down the time, because I know people have been asking, hey, can you put down the times? Make sure that, we kind of know what's going to happen here with the reviews, and if we want to, skip around and look for specific things, can you let us know? Well, I'm going to let you know I'm writing down the time so that you guys will have timestamps on the YouTube, not on the podcast, or on the Spotify, but on the podcast that is broadcast on the YouTube. We will have timestamps in the description. But just taking a look for the week 2 majors, only one of the 3 games was played. The Reapers had to reschedule their game against the Apes, and the V-Bakas had to reschedule their game against the Emperors. But let's talk about the one that was played. The Frostwolves played the King's Court Dukes, and the King's Court Dukes kind of expected to play really, really well. We know that Cooter, who is the owner of that team, I recently had an interview with him last week talking about how, he has intensive preparations, he does a lot of research, he asks around to a lot of places, and we kind of looked at his roster and went, wow, okay, that's a lot of names we know from season 3. It's a lot of names that played really well in season 3. Couple of, former champions brought back. But this week, didn't quite perform against the Frostwolves as they did against the Apes. They were able to 2-0 the Apes, but now they get 2-0'd by the Frostwolves, and instead of picking up that crucial point, they get blanked here. So why don't you lead us through your thoughts on this one real quick?
Yeah, we experienced the Frostwolves in week 1. I know you went over it a bit, and this is a really strong team. Not a lot of credit's been given. Drew's Food has had an excellent 2 sets so far. Chef, I think, has really shown himself as the top solo laner right now in the league. He absolutely dominated this. He gets a first blood over Rylan in the first game. A little bit of other weird stuff, but I remember a couple notable spots where Chef just goes in the back line and kills both the backliners and does an excellent job for the Frostwolves. And also, Drew's Food had an insane fight, so even when the Frostwolves seemed to slip up, it really looked like this dive for the Frostwolves kind of cleaned up a lot of the areas in which they messed up. And we haven't really seen the Frostwolves at full strength yet because in game 1 especially, both teams used their sub. Rylan was subbing in for the Dukes, and Brownside was playing mid, and I'm a Gamer was at support, and Brownside's a really strong mid laner as well, although he's their primary support player. So we really haven't seen this team at full strength, and especially in game 1, Brownside had a couple of huge Scylla ultis. Clay City gets himself picked off around the Fire Giant, almost pretty much one-tapped. Stepping up a bit too much, and that leads to just a good fight by the Wolves, and then a clean Fire Giant, which then eventually leads to a good dive under the Phoenix. I think Drew's Food gets a pretty good Huntbot's ulti. Brownside finds another ultimate on top of Clay City, which gets him nearly one shot. Chef cleans up on the Tsukiyomi, especially top damage. he built more damage than he really did tank, and did not really get punished as much as you would think he would, especially out of that solo lane role. Sandman not really able to find too much of a footing. Did a good job in both games pressuring out early, but struggled to find a lot of damage, especially towards those later stages because he was playing Chang'e and Hell. Just not quite able to walk up and do as much damage, and that was just because of how well Chef and how well Drew was doing on that dive, especially. And in game two, I noted when I was watching and going over and prepping for this podcast, it seemed like that front line out of the Kings Dukes isn't quite comfortable with each other. I don't know what it is, but a lot of times they would find them, especially in game two, find themselves on top of each other and then just getting CC'd and a bunch of damage being pumped in, which then eventually just led to bad fights for the Kings Dukes and that the Frost Wolves capitalized on. But in terms of like good things we could talk about for the Dukes, especially on this one, they did a great job throughout the mid game, just um, pressuring out buffs and rotating together, but when it seemed like it was ready for this fire giant fight, they were always just the second ones to be grouped or not grouped at all, and it was just weird. So, uh, a couple things that the Dukes could clean up, and more so just getting grouped better and being in position where they need to be to contest these more late game objectives like the FG would certainly just elevate their play, and then just the Frost Wolves keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I got to corroborate with a lot of what you just said there. I mean, especially when you're looking at even just the sets of numbers from game one and game two, especially in game one, things very, very similar across the board, damage wise, kill wise. I mean, Chef was able to kind of clean up some of those. He did finish with an 848 record and 28k damage, but I mean, number two was Xenon with that 3, 2, and 8 record on a Charybdis. So you go from the jungler to the ADC, but you only have about an 8k separation. And you know Tsukiyomi has that excellent late game, absolute brutalized, power kind of, I'm going to
Good
one-shot you, I'm just going to smash you in the face. And, seeing that even Drew's food picks off or gets 20k as well on the Hunbats. So, which, interestingly enough, you see two junglers there. Well, junglers, I say junglers, but assassins. And one of them in the solo lane, which I believe was Chef's, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a Suki solo. But I say, and pardon me for saying, yeah, it was a jungler, but it was a solo there. I just naturally associate assassins with jungle. But to see that, even so, the damage is more spread out throughout the team, noticing that they are grouping for team fights. They are working off of each other. The follow-up damage is there. I'm a Gamer comes up with 16 assists. Daru's Food comes up with 10 assists. Brownside playing mid lane on a Scylla still has 10 assists in game number one. I mean, that's just phenomenal by them. And then, switching over to game two, again, Chef has a 28k game. Villain has a 23k game. Xenon has a 23k game. Very even across the board. It's not like you can point to one person and go, that guy absolutely popped off. The only reason they won was that one player. Now, granted, Chef on both games had a really good game. Top kills both games, top damage both games, but on the flip side, something that we've been noticing is Vacus in that support role picks the Cirquet game one, goes into a Sylvanas game two, gets first blooded on that Sylvanas, and we see him on these aggressive type supports. And I don't know about you, but maybe that's not where the Kings Dukes are the most comfortable on these aggressive supports. But it seems to work a little bit. I mean, 0-4 and 5 on a Sylvanas is not exactly, great numbers. 0-4 and 4 on a Cirquet, maybe not great numbers, but at the same time, still has very high damage mitigated, still works wonders trying to get his team into favorable situations. It just seems like they're maybe not quite keying off of each other together.
Yeah, and that leads to what I was kind of pointing out in my initial thoughts, especially like how they were moving around the map throughout the mid game. That Sylvanas pick, or especially that Circuit picks, allows for that facilitation of looking for these buff invades, and that's not really the Frostwolves game. They seem to be a bit uncomfortable in the mid lane, not in the mid lane, but in the mid game. Not
Hmm.
not awfully uncomfortable, but like not as comfortable as the Dukes are, and that's what they played, especially last season as well. They played really well. You see, mostly it is that core back of Sandman Samuel, Clay City, and then obviously you have King Kudu as the org owner right there, bringing those two players back.
Hmm.
And it just seems Bacchus making his transition to from mid lane last season to support isn't quite comfortable in those late game scenarios, but understands what they want to do throughout the mid game just because he was a part of that core as well last season.
Hmm.
And it just tends to lead, like I was saying as well, especially in game two, because Socket's a bit more mobile. In game two, a lot of the times those fights were ended just because Bacchus kind of stepped out a bit too far ahead of himself, thinking he needed a peel for a certain person, and just ends up getting himself blown up by a soul ult and terror combo into a soul ult, and like I think 2 or 3 occasions, which really impacted the game because I think it led to major objectives going down immediately after, or the game actually. I believe one of the times the Mulan and Sylvanas got caught out together leads to a rival over the wall to find Clay City. Those three just die immediately, and then all 5 of them just walk in to take the Titan. No fire giant necessary. And so I think once he starts to get a little bit more comfortable, understands what he can do on some characters compared to what he can do on other characters, will help this team improve overall. And that was the Dukes at full strength too, because Buggy Dude came in game two and replaced for Rylan, whereas Villain came off the bench for Brownside, but Brownside I'm assuming had to leave. So I'm a gamer has played, I believe, every game for this Frostwolves team in the support role,
Hmm.
and I don't think people are giving him enough credit for what he does. He was finding excellent Yamoja walls, Yamoja ultimates in game one, finding 2, 3 people at a time, and then in game two, doing an excellent job at just keeping certain targets locked down. And I think a lot of teams don't do that well enough. Is when is it time to turn on the front line when those frontliners have made egregious mistakes and need to be punished for it? And I think the Frostwolves do that better than anybody else right now of recognizing when you should look for the backline and when you should just look at the people standing right in front of you. And that's what they did in this set, and that really led to their victory.
Yep, I completely agree with that one. So as we shift our view now from the majors to the minors, um, again had one reschedule here in this one. The Frost Foxes having to take a little bit of time to find out a schedule that works for their game against the King's Court Barons, but we did get 2 out of the 3 played. Let's talk about the Ferryman and Lion's Pride first. So Ferryman and Lion's Pride, this one I was expecting a little bit more out of the Lion's Pride to be, completely honest, but I really liked what the Ferryman brought to the table. Maybe you can talk to that as they 2-0 the Lion's Pride here in week 2 in the QSL.
Yeah, it was a bit of a weird set, and it really kind of started out in game one where you see something that you don't really see a lot. You see a Zeus mid, and that's not even close to the weirdest thing you see. Like in game one, there was a Loki, not a Loki, but a Kali solo for the Ferryman, a mid Charybdis, and then a Zeus mid for the Lion's Pride, and just Zorzith and Cyber on that Loki did an excellent job. That mid duo combo, just farming up, getting really ahead. Zorzif got a lot of kills on that Zeus, although Zeus did a lot of damage. And Peaceful Mind, I think, played overall a positive set. He just didn't really have the front line to support him. I he just died a lot because that's kind of just what Zeus does. And Kalaholic on that Fenrir, especially in game one, got off to a decent start, but it found a lot of kills. But I think he started off 3-1. And whilst I was watching that set, I noticed like later in that set he was like 3-9, and so he really slowed back what he was able to do because Cyber was just getting all this form. Although he was ganking, he wasn't keeping up in XP and found himself behind like 3 levels. very quickly, and that kind of just led to a little bit of a snowball. Although the ferryman made a couple of questionable decisions and a couple weird fights, it didn't really lead to anything that the Lions Prides could do, and it just overall led to the ferryman's the Lions Pride collapse in game one, just not really able to kill anybody in the back line, and their front line just seemed to be kind of lost a lot of the times, and not really know where to be, what to do. And in game two, it was more of the same things. The Hercules from King Stampy, I felt was a bit better than his Rat solo. He was just a bit more tankier, but he is a Hercules, and so whenever he would just get pinned by an O-Long, knocked up by an O-Long, he got blown up very quickly. I think Cyber did a very good job in game two facilitating their aggression on that O-Long chin. Although Zorzith played Cribdus mid again, and he did an absolute ton of damage. He went early crit, and I don't think I saw a lot of spectral armors out of the Lion's Pride, so they kind of shot themselves in the foot again. And I believe Soul Terminator, I think Louis is what people call him. He had an excellent game on that Soul as well. I believe led in damage in game two, followed closely behind by Zorzith. And it was just overall the same story. It's just not a lot of coordination out of the Lions Pride. You thought they might be able to pull something. They had um, pretty good moments here or there, but they never could kind of bring it all together. And then it just eventually led to a pretty clean 2-0, I would say, for the Ferrymen, although they could definitely clean up some unnecessary fighting and just look for objectives. But overall, just really not much um, that the Ferrymen did wrong, and the Lion Pride just made way too many mistakes, especially from their frontline members, to really kind of compete.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched this game, it kind of reminded me that last year, or I say last year, last season, sort of the major surprise for back then, which was the Obsidian Knights. Now the organization becomes the Zoo, and we have the Lions Pride and the Miners. But the surprise last season was the sort of outbreak of Peaceful Mind as this mid laner that is just phenomenal when it comes to a Miners Division player. And yet now that realization has sort of become an expectation, and now Peaceful Mind seems to have a lot on his shoulders. Leading the team in damage in both games, playing the Giannis in game two, I believe it was, and in game one, I believe he was the Zeus. And I mean, first of all, 30k damage on a Zeus is nothing to sneeze at. You know the Zeus is going to deal damage. But compare that to the rest of his teammates. Chaos on a Jingwei gets 10. Kahalik on a Fenrir gets 11. King Stampy on the Rat gets 13. Covet, not expecting a ton from the Athena, but, gets 7,400. There's no one to really matching him. Now, it was a little bit more balanced in game two. He had 15.5. King Stampy was the next highest at 14.6, and then Kahalik at 14.4. But that is still, more balanced, yes, but still, when you're flipping it on the other side and Terminator comes out with a 24k game on a Soul, and Zareth with that mid Charybdis comes out with a 23k game, you're kind of scratching your head going, okay, wait a second, what happened here? Maybe it's because they weren't on the same page. Maybe it's because there were some difficulties, arguments. I know grouping up, they didn't look as comfortable. In the laning phase, they tried to do a couple of different things, but as soon as you tried to bring the whole team together, in my opinion, it just looked like the Ferrymen were so much more comfortable with each other than the Lions Pride, and it really came through as once that late game sort of team deathball started, it really wasn't going to stop.
Yeah, and then I think a lot of times, like especially I noted in game one, like the Zeus is being just ran at on top of by I believe the Kali, and then the Athena runs the opposite. And I understand sometimes when you recognize that a fight is over, you need to leave and regardless, and maybe save your life.
Hmm.
But she ends up going back in after the Zeus was pretty much dead to rights. She goes back in and dies as well. So you got to really think about what you're prioritizing. If you think the Zeus is dead and there's nothing you can do to stop it, then just straight up leave and not run away from him and then run back and die yourself. And then especially in game two, I believe Covet played the Bacchus support,
Hmm.
and there wasn't really after the belly flop. I don't think he was finding a lot of stuns. I think he was getting interrupted a lot by this Ymir, and I think Hunter played a pretty good game, both games on Ymir, finding good walls and really stopped a lot of retreating and really forced the Lions Pride to face their team, and it just didn't go well for them because when really all the setup you have in game one is an Athena taunt, and that's really it because your Fenrir dies really early in a fight, and you just have a rat solo who's didn't really do much in game one, and then in game two the Hercules just not finding his mechanics in game two, not finding a lot of uh pool pool pluck and pools. It's just what are you gonna really do? They did have Huntbot's ult and a Oloron ult, but at that point in the game, the Ferrymen were just way too much farm and uh, so much stronger than the Lions Pride. Although I felt like they probably scaled a bit better, they just didn't have the coordination in order to fight. It seemed like the one would drop their kit and then die, and then the next one would say, "Okay, it's my turn. Go and drop their kit and then die." And that's obviously not going to be enough. They got to be doing it all together simultaneously whilst communicating where players are and who needs help.
Yeah, completely agree with that one. So quick question for you. In this game, I mean, we saw sort of the ferrymen work well as a team, but individually, who do you have maybe as your MVP?
I gotta definitely say it was Zorzith. And multiple times he found a couple resets on his maul, and then just the consistency in both games that he had. I think he was 5-1 in game two, and I think he got off to like a 6-0 start in game one. Finding double kills. One of my favorite plays in the whole game was they'll go the Ymir and Charybdis, which is always it, and Hunter are going on top of the Zeus middle. You see the Athena ult coming down onto the Zeus. He uses the Maw to execute the Zeus as the Athena lands, and then immediately stuns the Athena with the Maw execute, and then stuns him again with a second reset of it. And I thought that was an absolutely great play. Just a little bit of patience. He allowed the Ymir damage to go through first, and then decided to execute, and then it led up to I believe another kill for the team instead of just executing the Zeus immediately. He was patient, and I think Zoz's understanding of the game. I think he's playing at a bit of a higher level right now than a lot of the members in this minors league, and I know him personally, and I know he's a pretty good player, and he just was really consistent. He did a lot of damage, and he forced relics with this Cryptus, got a couple good knockups off, survived a lot of the dive that they did try to attempt onto him, and it led to a lot of the ferryman's success, especially with their dive. It seemed like he would be the first one to go in just to use his 3 immune to immediately get out of the fight after they dumped a bunch on him, and then turn it back around using his maul and just his crits that he brought with to the table.
Excellent. So, um, game three in the minors, and this is sort of a weird one. This one was played, I believe, a night or two before the patch, and the problem is when it's that close, it's really really tough to get everything in, especially when you don't have all the casters lined up, and sometimes schedules between how the game can be played and how it can be casted doesn't quite line up. And sadly, this game was unable to be casted purely because by the time we had casters, Hi-Rez said, hey guys, by the way, here's a patch. And whenever there's a patch that comes out, all of the previous replays get wiped. So unless you can revert your Smite client to the point where it can go back to it, somehow it doesn't quite work. And unfortunately, we don't have all the resources that Hi-Rez has, or that the SPL, the SCC has, and because of that, we were unable to broadcast this game. But between the Meow Lovers and the Rock Hoppers, the Meow Lovers get the better of the Penguins, and they come away with a 2-0 victory. Now, I know we don't have a huge replay to kind of go through and give you highlights, but we do have some screenshots. We do have some information on this game. So just taking a look at some of the screenshots and some of the analysis that we can do based off of this, gotta give a shout out just straight up to Gumbo on this Mulan. 6-3-15, but comes away with 35k damage on a Mulan. What in the world, man?
Yeah, Mulan does a lot of damage, and I think she's really underrated, especially in that solo lane. I think overall this not the Rock Hoppers team, but the Meow Lovers team, like Dummy Slick did 40k in game 1, and followed up by 35k by Gumbo in game 2. Just that backline dive seeming to have the way with him. And shout outs to Rapid Coordination, Olive, was a support for us last season. And I'm glad that he's finding some success. And as you were attesting to, we can really only just go off stats and details of what happened throughout this game. And it doesn't seem like it was that bad of a game by the Rock Hoppers. It seemed like they put out a decent amount of numbers, just wasn't able to find maybe some of those closing kills. I wish I got to go back and watch maybe what happened in some of those team fights to really point it out, but it's just notable shout outs like you were saying. I think Dummy Slick, it looked like he had a good game, 13 and 4 in game 2, had 40k damage on Tsukiyomi, 11 and 5 in game 1. Olive was a part of 18 kills in game 1, as well as being a part of 17 kills in game 2, and so overall just doing a great job. I think we should give a shout out to Kumi Boomy. He looked like he had a pretty good game 2, and not the best game 1, but definitely picked it up in game 2. And also Who's Davy did a pretty excellent job at just getting a good damage numbers off, but not really finding much else, and really struggled in game 2. It seemed on that Afro at 1 and 8.
Yeah, and speaking of struggling, I mean, Icy Orphan as well kind of struggled. First game on the Huyi, second game on the Izanami. Just trying to find some footing. Really tough to do so. I mean, Huyi Bacchus is known to be sort of this aggressive combo, and yet, Bacchus ends up with 4 kills, and the Huyi doesn't have any. You got to scratch your head a little bit and go, well, wait a second, why is Bacchus getting the kills? But on the backside, you have an Izanami Sobek in the second game, and Izanami gets kills. Sobek, there's not a lot of kills to go around, though. Sobek ends up with 4 assists with 7 deaths. The Izanami 3, 6, and 4. You kind of look at it and go, okay, is it a straight line thing? Is it an aggression thing? Was there some rotations that maybe didn't quite happen, needed to happen? Was it a farm race? Especially in game number 1, if you're an ADC and you have an issue of 06 and 12 as your line, you're definitely involved in team fights. You're getting assists from your team fights. You know that. But in game 2, nobody's really getting the kills. Nobody's really getting the picks. It's kind of, what are you able to do in lane? And, I mean, kudos to Sheru on this Heimdall in game 2 with a 9, 2, and 10. That is crazy for a Heimdall, to be honest.
Yeah.
But to do as well as they did, I mean, maybe there's a couple of things in the Rock Hoppers where they kind of go back to the drawing board and go, okay, if we're going to go aggressive, maybe we pair up these kind of gods as opposed to if we want to, play back and kind of scale, we need to play something a little bit more safe or something a little bit more competitive here.
Mhm.
Again, I can only speculate because we don't have the actual game footage, but taking a look at the screenshots we do have, I mean, again, kudos and congrats to the Meow lovers for pulling this one out. But I'd love to hear maybe in the comments or later on from some of the rock hoppers as to, maybe what's one or two things that could be done well. And, what's something you guys can take away from the game going, what, even though we lost and we lost 2-0, here's something that happened really well in this game. And I think that we can build off of this. I'd love to hear from
Yeah.
those guys because they're going to have the insight.
Yeah, also, like, I want to point out, it looked like actually just from these rock hoppers, it looked like one half of the team would have a good game, and like in game one, like half the team had a good game, and then in game two, the opposite happened. The half that had a good game in game one had a bad game, but the half that had a good game in that had a bad game in game one had a decent game two, and it just like if they can find where everybody is having a good game at the same time, it could lead to some improvement. And then also just like take a look at these comps, and you see in game one, you see a Socket, an Osiris, a Bacchus. What are you really looking for? That in my mind, that's a lot of dive. And then you just have the Hu Yi and Soul. They're gonna struggle trying to find their way into the dive, especially going up against an Oleron, Odin, Aphrodite. Like, how do you kill that Oleron? Because that's who you're going to be diving. So it doesn't really makes sense to build your comp with all dive, and then you don't really have enough damage to kill an Oleron or kill that Aphrodite just because of the amount of peel that this Odin and Ymir is going to offer to him. And then especially in game one, I love the comp that the Meow lovers put together. You pick up the Kali, you grab the Kepri, and then Kali, if she can't get a second life for herself, you just throw a Kepriel on top of her, and that gives her another opportunity to go out there and find a second life for herself. And compared to just having a tier or Sobek, characters that seem to have kind of fallen off the meta, although looked really strong in season 7, just not really able to find their, and even early in season 8, not really able to find their footing later this season. And then like the Izanami, like getting shut down by a complete counter pick in the Heimdall. Like even when you go invisible, the Heimdall can just throw up the one and immediately see you, and that goes the same for the Loki. And so it just seems like maybe the Rockhoppers could work a bit on building comps and just theory crafting before the set, or just say, hey, this is our idea. This is what we kind of want to go for. This is the kind of comp we want to play. This is, and then also just think about what their play style is and how their comps can achieve that specific style of play. And that could really elevate how the Rockhoppers play.
Absolutely. And you know what? Game two, you know, kudos to both sides on that one. Or sorry, a 2-0 there. Kudos to both sides. Well done getting it played. I wish we could have had that one casted. Hopefully, we'll have the casters next time and we'll be able to do it without the pressures of that patch coming so soon. But let's shift gears just a touch here into the amateur side of things. Now, this was the only division that had all 3 games played. So we had the Frost Pups against the King's Court Knights, the Serbs against the Cutie Koalas, and the VCat Girls against the Adelis. Let's start off with the Frost Pups against the King's Court Knights. King's Court Knights coming off with a 2-0 victory over the Frost Pups, and this just kind of seems to be the snowball effect already. They come off a 2-0 victory against the Cutie Koalas in week 1, and now they're 2-0ing in week 2 as well. And the King's Court Knights look really, really strong.
Yeah, and especially in this amateur league, the King Courts Knights, another team built by the beloved King Cooter. Uh, though comps team to lead to their victories a lot. Though playing, a lot of people are going to look at the amateur and say, obviously these aren't the major players, and they're going to be playing at a bit of a different meta than other people. And the picks tend to show how that meta is different in the amateur scene. You see Chalk picked up, you see Bastet picked up, not characters that you typically see, but they have pretty low ceiling, And that is what makes them great characters at that division, especially because if you're able to just pick a character that is just known to dominate Bastet and get a bunch of damage off really easily. Chalk is considered a lane bully, and if those teams aren't able to adapt to maybe use their relics properly or peel back properly or even just to help assist another lane, it could lead to a bit of a snowball in favor. So I love what the Knights did in terms of building their comp in game one. And it's not as similar in game two, but they pick up the Nike, they stay with the Ares, and they seem to do another good job. It looked like the Chiron popped off. I didn't get to, sadly, unfortunately, watch this set. And just once again, going off stats, I know Redsniper, he's going to get the big details for you, but overall, they're just playing these easy execute comps, and you see that even at the highest levels. Sometimes teams that are struggling will just go back to easy execute comps, and that tends to help them find victories, and then they could go into those more advanced comps later on.
Yeah, and to be completely forthright, the reason why they're easy to execute comps is because they have particular ideas around them that everybody can get around. Can they be countered? Well, yeah, but at the same time, at an amateur's level, at a lower skill cap, so to speak, you're going to have players that are not quite as polished. You're not going to see the amazing outplays or the insane amounts of, perfect autos hit or something like that. You're going to have a little bit of slop, a little bit of here and there that's not going to quite go right. So if you have something like, I don't know, a chalk alt that knocks up everybody and silences them, an Ares alt
Big
that's going
circles.
to pull big, exactly, big circles. And then on top of it, hey, let's throw a Scylla that just nukes everybody around you. I mean, it works. There's a reason why some of these picks come out even in, the higher divisions and even in SPL play. It's because these are known to work. And if somebody's not having a great day, you go back to that comfort pick. You go back to something that maybe allows you to feel a little bit more at ease in lane. And in game number one, we saw the King's Court Knights actually switch their lineup. Craig Afro is normally their ADC, and he ends up going into the jungle with a Bastet. Now, he does go back to the ADC role when they switch Lineman Nelson for Eurydice in game two. JKT goes from the ADC role into solo, and Craig goes from the jungle over to the ADC role as they bring in Eurydice, who comes into the jungle playing the Daji. But something you kind of see here, and it makes you go, okay, what are they looking for? The Daji will either burn your beads or kill you. The Ares will burn your beads or kill you, especially when you have a massive Giannis right there and a huge Chiron right there. But honestly, JKT on that Nike started showing a little bit of really, I would almost say, bully potential. Ends up with 14k on the Nike, but really worked his magic against a Cthulhu who went 4-3-2 in Jeering Lamb. And yeah, you kind of expect the Cthulhu to deal damage, but not 22k leading his team, and in fact, doubling everybody else on his team in damage. So Jeering did have a good game too, but not the real issue happened when you're forcing someone, a player such as Raptor, to throw the soul into the mix and go, okay, find your picks yourself. I mean, I don't know if the Horus was kind of designed for more sustain there, but it wasn't really... I felt there was more conservativeness out of the Frost Pups in Game 2 rather than Game 1. Game 1, they kind of came out swinging and paid for it. Glass and Volpez went 1-5-1. Yo-Yo Tap Out went 0-6-1. Jeering Lamb even went 3-5-2. they came out swinging and they ended up getting burned. So in game 2, they kind of look back and go, wait a second, let's try and play a little more conservative. Let's try and make sure we have the sustain. Destal comes out from the Jingwei, Devo's gauntlets. We see mannequins coming out from the Soul with Pythag's first item, Vampire Shroud coming out for the Cthulhu. So we're looking at more of a conservative style build across the board, which is great because it means that they don't die a lot. I mean, Yo-Yo Tap Out had 5 deaths, Glass and Vulpes had 5 deaths, but I mean, that's the most, and that was about half the deaths on the team just between those 2 players. So yeah, they got beat up a little bit, but on top of it, it's like, where was the aggression? Your ADC only gets 5k, your mid only gets 8k. I mean, that's as much as your support. Your support got 8,300 damage. Your jungler, the Nemesis, gets 7,500. That's really tough. Really, really tough to say, okay, play a team as talented as the King's Court Knights. I mean, they're all insanely good players. Sadly, I mean, I'm part of the Cutie Koalas. We played them in week number 1 and absolutely got smashed. And it's one of those things where you go, wait a second, are you kidding me? Little Nino pops off because he can. Craig Afro pops off because he can. They have that potential to take it to another gear. And game number 1, they kind of had to do that because they were missing one player, with lineman Nelson coming in. But then Eurydice comes in game 2, and you just see them go back to these comfort picks, and it's like, man, we're just gonna win the game. We're not gonna overly pressure. We're not gonna high kill game. We're just gonna win the game. We're just gonna get the objectives and win the game. So that was sort of the question mark here, is what's the next step for the Frost Pups? Do you need to switch up your order? Do you need to bring in a new player? Do you need to look at some way, somehow, of gelling together? Maybe it's a scrim issue. Maybe, I know Glass and Vulpes, Ice Fox went from the minors down to amateurs, and because of that, he's still trying to get used to this team. Sadly, he only have 5 weeks, and it's already week 2. So it's really tough at this point to say, okay, maybe you write off the Frost Pups. I'm not willing to do that yet. I think there's still
found a win.
I mean, yeah, they have some talent there, but you know, you kind of scratch your head after a game like this and go, okay, we see sort of what the top of the amateurs division is right now. There's your sort of goal to shoot for. Okay? It hurts. It really hurts to get smacked like that. But it's that learning experience that you kind of take back and go, okay, this is what we did well. This is what we didn't do well. Here's what we need to work on for the future. And I think the Frost Pups, what they need to work on for the future is taking the individual strengths and coordinating them a lot better. Jiring is good in that solo lane, but he needs to be able to rotate to help out his mid, to help out his jungle. Yeah, it's going to hurt for farm, but if he can help get his mid ahead and have a damage dealer late in the game that's about the same level as him, maybe they're able to swing some of those team fights. Maybe they're able to work some of those things a little bit easier, but you just never know at this point.
Yeah, and that like also following up leads to a bit of that conversation that we had just a few moments ago, talking about the Rockhoppers. You look back, you were talking about the Horus. Like, what does that team necessarily accomplish? You have a Nemesis, she's not bringing any hard CC, and then once your Cthulhu ults down, what do you really have that you say, I hit this button and this person can no longer play Smite? And that's really all they have is Horus. And when Horus isn't able to do what he wants to do because Ares completely counters him if he finds the chains, and then you just look at these not easy to execute, but like these circle comps, Ares pool speeds, Daji pool speeds. Nike is just really hard to kill. Chiron a CC immune ult. A lot of damage also can give CC immunity to other people. So even if you find that horror stun, Chiron can immediately counter it as well. And then you're never going to be able to keep up with a Janice as a nemesis, really. You just go through a wall, she has to run around it, and then that's why you maybe see these lower damage numbers out of these backliners. They just didn't really have anything to follow up for it. And this is a thing that everybody struggles with, even at the high level. Like,
Hmm.
you'll be surprised as juking becomes better, hitting skill shots become harder. And if you're not able to get a lot of setup, you'll find yourself struggling, and you might think you're having a bad game, but then you can also look back and say, well, where really am I having those opportunities to do damage, you know? And it didn't seem like they had the ability, especially in game two, to do a lot of setup. And then even in game one, you look at the Fafnir by Camazots. If you missing your hammers, then what is that character necessarily going to bring forth other than that steroid? And it's going to be hard to really utilize that steroid when there's not a lot of setup for your ADC to hit autos or for your Persephone to hit these 2-1 combos. And even with the Raven, once his ultimate's down, not a lot of mobility, has a little bit of damage immunity, but against the amount of CC that they had with the Scylla root, the Ares cripple, the Ares pool, the Heimdall ultimate, and then just a load of damage coming out of this Bastet that's going to make it even harder for you. Like, if you miss these one or two really important skill shots, then how does your comp help achieve victory if you miss that skill shot? And you see that a lot of the time, even in the majors. Like, if you don't hit your Fafnir hammer and you don't have a backup plan to, if that Fafnir hammer misses, we now try to use this CC, then you don't really have a lot to go off of, you know? And so
Hmm.
maybe just like, I think everybody at every level should go back and really look at, what does my comp do, and how does their comp kind of counter it whilst we're building it? Or just also like, let's make sure we have these easy ability CCs that we know that follow up will work after we hit those CC abilities.
Hmm. No, I completely agree with you. That's something that we're starting to see and even develop in the amateur side is, we talked about easy comps. Well, it's a comp. You either have a pick comp or a team fighting comp or front to back or something like that, but a team is designed to work in a particular way. The ADC has a job, the mid has a job, the jungler has a job, the support has a job, and everybody works together. Sometimes you end up with kind of these, what I call spaghetti comps. You throw at the wall and you see what sticks.
Hmm.
Um, that's kind of a problem sometimes in the amateurs where you get a lot of spaghetti comps. You never know what's going to happen. Sometimes you just get that one person on that one god that just pops off and everything's fine. Sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. Um, one good game leads to, you know, another one or another one, and sometimes it just doesn't. So it's kind of tough. Speaking of tough, let's move along here. Um, oh boy.
Oh,
Uh,
not this time.
yeah, I guess it's time to talk about this one. So the Serbs and the cutie koalas. You know what? No, no. We're gonna talk about the cat girls and Adelis first. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm vetoing that. We're talking about cat girls and Adelis first. So taking a look at cat girls and Adelis, cat girls come away with a 2-0 victory on this one. Um, Again, looking at this, I mean, this is such a tough game for the Adelis. I don't really want to talk a ton about this one just because the Adelis are sort of finding themselves. And I say finding themselves because they are they've had so much turnover and turmoil in that I don't want to call it a locker room, but they've had so much turnover on that roster that it's really tough for them to work together. Spin Sovereign is still there, Raging Panda Bear is still there, but that's about it. I think everybody else is new on that team. Bacon Crumbs got picked up, Purbang got picked up, Arbalest got picked up. So it's really tough for a team to really work together and play well together when they haven't been able to play a lot together.
Hmm.
I mean, having 2 men, 3 men get together, play some, play some scrims or some casuals together is great, but it doesn't really replace that 5 man. Let's all do casuals together. Let's have a scrim together. Let's work on
Hmm.
certain things. Having those 2 3 man groups doesn't really replace that. And that's kind of the problem with the Adelies right now. The 2 3 man group of Arbalest, Bacon Crumbs, Spin Sovereign, it's there. It works. But, like, Spin Sovereign goes 0-3-3 on a Jing Chen. Purbang goes 0-4-3 on Chernobog. Later on, you see Purbang going, in his more preferred role of mid at 3-6-8 on a disco. Spin Sovereign goes 2-4-10 on a Nike. It's not like they had bad games, but they just weren't able to coordinate, especially against the likes of Uncle Fable and General Telia. And good grief, I don't know if maybe this is a forecast for maybe my picks for MVP of the amateurs division at this point. I have yet to see a bad game out of Uncle Fable and General Telia. The
Hmm.
ADC in the mid lane for the VCAT girls is insane. If I didn't know any better, I swear they're smurfing because they're just
Yeah.
that good. I hate to say it, but they just look that good. Um, in week 3, I think they play the Knights. And I mean, I'm looking forward to that game. That is going to be phenomenal. To see Craig Afro go up against General Telia that's the game to watch. Honestly, that is the game to watch. Um, I'm looking forward to that one. But
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but
yeah,
I certainly agree with you. Just having time to spend, and as you were talking about, we don't really want to spend too much time because this isn't really what Adelia's potential is because they all
hmm
just kind of just got grabbed together. And a big thing, especially in MOBAs and especially in these like team-based games, a lot of these times you just have to build trust because even just like
yep,
a split second, like, well, hopefully he hits this or hopefully he hits that because then I can do this. Like that just little bit of delay that you have because you haven't built up necessarily that trust or that and your teammates to be able to perform can really limit you at sometimes compared to where cat go they seem to have trust in each other even before the ability animation is finished they know that's going to hit so they
hmm
automatically follow up with their ability before dr or even just the ability is over with and the stun is over with or the mez is over with whatever it is and so that plays a huge factor in games so we'll give this team a little bit of time to really grow, maybe play a couple scrims, or just play with each other in general to really grow as a team. And hopefully they come back in week 3 and perform really well.
yep. And of course, let's talk now about the last of the amateur games from week 2. The Serbs and the Koalas. And of course, I'm part of the Koalas, so I got firsthand knowledge on this one. Um, oh, this hurt so bad. To be honest, this one hurt a lot. Um, Game 1 was on a knife edge more often than not. It was just the little things that kind of bit us in the end. And bug catcher land on that Jablanque. No offense, I hate that stupid thing now. Um, it's not
Was
that the
this
gun.
pre-patch?
This
Because
was
even
yeah, this was pre-patch, and
because he's even more irritating
oh
post-patch. I'll
yeah,
tell you that.
oh yeah, no, and Jablanque isn't necessarily insanely overpowered or broken or anything like that. I mean, he only did 17k, but it's the annoyance of getting damaged over and over again, and he's got this leap, this CC immune leap that's up every 15 seconds that just bugs me. It's like, can I just silence you? Can I just drop you? Can I do something to you? And that was kind of the style of the game in game number 1. Bug Catcher Land comes out with 17k. Vster in the mid lane, though, on this Persephone, in my opinion, is player of the game.
Popped
7
off.
0 and 21, popped off on a Persephone, does 30k damage, and is just absolutely insane. Goes up against Stinky Pinky in the mid lane on a soul. And the reason for that is the normal ADC, the normal mid laner, Adzikaus, wasn't able to be there. He had a family emergency that popped up, and he was supposed to be there, so the Koalas used a FA sub to play this one. And, I mean, sad to say, it's like, sometimes you just need that 5 men to be there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's the guy we know, that's the guy we trust, that's the guy, that we wanted to play against, or to play with. And it's like, well, okay, I guess we grab somebody off the bench. So
Yeah, and it definitely showed in that mid 3v3, especially in game 1. We'll talk about game 2 a little bit in a second, but in game 1, it just seemed like they couldn't really find their footing. 1 and 8 on that Stinky Pinky. Neptune sadly going 1 and 9, and then 3 and 10 on your Rat jungle. Your side
mhm,
lanes seem to perform quite well, but it's just like that mid lane cohesion, changing a mid laner out and just plug and placing really affects a team, and it seemed to really show um, how much success the other team had. That Cthulhu had an amazing game as well, 8-2 and 21 on the opposing side, but when you're just mid 3v3, it's all doing about 11k a piece compared to 30k just from the Persephone. Well, pretty much 30k from the Persephone alone, pretty much
mhm,
matching that.
yeah,
It's going to be really tough to really find a game, especially on the knife's edge. Maybe if you see 4 or 5k more damage out of that soul, or 4 or 5k more damage out of that Ratatasker, the game does flip on that knife's edge over to your favor, but not able to execute, just because not familiarity with each other, or just not enough trust in that mid 3v3 can really make a game difficult.
mhm. And again, it's no disrespect to Humble Orb at all, but um, but coming into a situation like that, it's really difficult for him. You're expecting a certain play style, you're expecting certain things to go this way, that way, whatever, and it's like, oh, wait, my jungler isn't doing that anymore because it's not my jungler. Or this, I'm expecting this, and it doesn't happen. It puts him in a tough spot, and it puts the team in a tough spot too. So the Koalas, I don't think were able to play up to the full potential of the team. And we'll talk about it later, but there have been some changes made now. And so it's gonna be a interesting development there, but it hurts me because I really think that if we had our starting 5 here, not only does game 1 go the way uh of the Koalas, I think that maybe the set eventually goes the way of the Koalas. Um, I just
Momentum's a
think
big
that,
thing.
well, I believe that just because I know the quality of our team and I know how close that game 1 was, and I think when the mentality went that way and we went from being aggressive and playing in the face and doing what we wanted to do and going in with a game plan, and then all of a sudden that goes out the window and we play conservative in game 2, and it's, well, we're going to protect this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And if you look at the stat line, that didn't
Yeah,
happen at all.
yeah,
Um,
it seemed to be a pretty rough game, and it looked like it was explanation. It was exemplified just by how well that Speedy did on that Thanatos, and then once again Tiamat. I don't know how he wants us to pronounce it, but like V start, I'm assuming. Just 9,
yeah,
0, and 10 on that Tiamat mid is
yeah,
he had a set, to say the least.
Yeah, he did. He definitely did. And it was so hard to go from being um, in a position to of progressing, doing well, doing something that puts you on the front foot, to try and fight even or try and fight from an advantage, and instead the mentality goes out the window and you're kind of stuck going, okay, we're going to play safe now because we need to, take a step back on this. And I think that's really what uh, maybe is a detriment in game number two, because we totally flipped up the playstyle and it just didn't work. So we'll see how week three goes, but game two, week two, not ideal for the koalas, and it's one of those games where you just kind of bury the tape and move along.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we've been going for a while now, so they're probably ready for us to move on. I'm assuming we're talking about roster changes heading into week three.
Yes, we are. We are going to move into the official roster moves for week three. Um, so week three, let me double check. I just want to make sure here. Um, but we're gonna make sure. Uh, so we're talking right around the uh, yeah. Looks like we're gonna go from the 12th of November on is going to be our look at the changes up here, and Cyber gets dropped from the Ferryman to acquire Twitchy, um, and the Adelis drop Tuxley as player and captain, promoting Raging Panda Bear to captain. They also drop Be More Chaos to pick up Quiz and Per Bang to finish out their roster. So again, Tuxley and Be More dropped for Quiz and Per Bang, and Raging Panda Bear now becomes captain. Tuxley kind of taking a step back, um, just being the owner. He's got a lot of things going on in life. So just, we know real life comes first, but to make sure that, he's able to do what he needs to. But I think probably one of the bigger stories coming out in the transfer wire here, the ferrymen end up dropping uh, Omega Bulldog, the captain of their team, of the minors team, to free agency and acquire Cyber back.
Yeah.
They also get Zarzeth to complete the roster to 6 after losing Amur Venus to a self drop. Amur actually ended up leaving the server as well, the Discord server. So they finished their roster. What I know from behind the scenes is that Omega Bulldog was not happy with his situation in the Ferryman. There were some disagreements between him and some other team members, and it was decided that, you know what, Omega's gonna have to go to free agency, and so sadly that's what happened there. Also, the zoo drops Neptune from org ownership and has promoted Wolfman Sam. So Wolfman Sam is now the organization owner of the zoo, but Neptune is still around for the amateurs division. Adelis have dropped Bulver and have picked up Havoc to fill their roster. Bulver again self-dropped, Havoc getting picked up. And now the big one was yesterday. There was a lot of, the 17th had a lot of movement here. So the Lion's Pride drops Chaos Tonight from captaincy and promotes Kaholic to captain. The Cutie Koalas drop NASA to free agency, and Chaos Tonight now goes down to the amateurs, Cutie Koalas. Cutie Koalas also drop Neptune from captaincy and promote Chaos Tonight to captain of the amateur side. And the Lions now pick up Jake O from free agency to complete their roster. So Neptune gets dropped. Kaholic becomes captain of the Lions Pride. The Chaos Tonight drops from minors to amateurs and becomes captain of the amateurs side. And Neptune, now not being the org owner, is not required to be the captain of the amateur side. And then the last one is we've had quite a lot here, but the last one is the Ferrymen acquire Icy Orphan to complete their roster to 6 after there was a self drop there from the Ferrymen. So that's everybody. That's all the moving and shaking that's been happening the first couple of weeks here.
So, no real changes in the majors. Important to know. I think everything that you spoke about was maybe one or two things that happened in the minors, but a bunch of shakeups going on in the amateur division.
Yeah, so Ferryman is amateurs, or sorry, Ferryman is minors, but the Cutie Koalas and the Adelis are both in the amateur division, and they had the biggest moves.
Uh,
So, yeah, and I've also been notified that I'm now the sub on my team, so I've been taken off the starting roster as well. But okay, so that's been our moves and shakes for this week. But uh, let's move on to our preview for week number 3. All right. Well, actually, before we do that, real quick, let's take a look at the standings. I think that's probably an appropriate thing to do here. But so in the majors, we have the Wolves in first place, Frost Wolves in first place. 5 games played. They have 4-1 on record. It says 6 points. I don't know if it's 6 points. Oh no, they get the 2-0. That's right. They did have a 2-0, so that they get 3 points for that.
I think it's 3 points for set win regardless,
That is correct.
and then
Yes.
1 point to if someone even loses a set 1-2, it's a 1 point guaranteed. So even if you win, no matter what, you get 3 points. It's not like a 2 point situation. It's just 3 points per win.
Yep. So, but interestingly enough, we have the King's Court Dukes and the Reapers tied for second place. Dukes at 2-2, Reapers at 2-1, both of them with 3 points. Each have a set win. The Emperors and the V-Bakas are tied for fourth place, both with records of 1 and 2. They each have a point. And then the Apes, again, being 2-0 in week 1, meaning they are 0 and 2 and are sitting at the bottom with 0 points. Then we also have in the minors a 4-way tie for first place. It is the Foxes have a record of 2-1. Everybody else has a 2-0 record. That's the Barons, the Ferrymen, and the Meow Lovers, all with 3 points. The Rockhoppers in fifth with a 1-4 record with 1 point, and the Lions Pride at 0-4 with 0 points. In the amateurs division, you have the King's Court Knights and the V Cat Girls tied for first place, a 4-0 record for the Knights, and the Cat Girls with a 4-1 record, giving them both 6 points. The Serbs in third at a 3-2 record with 4 points. Frostpups in fourth with a 2-2 record with 3 points. And the Koalas and Adelis tied for sixth with a 0-4 record each. Although I really want to say tied for fifth rather than tied for sixth. Maybe that's just me. But 0-4, both with 0 points.
Bit of
Okay.
better outlook, I say. Tied
Yeah,
for fifth is better than being tied for sixth, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying, man. I'm trying. All right, let's take a look now at our next week coming up. In the in week 3, we have the V-Bakas against the King's Dukes, the Reapers versus the Emperors, the Apes versus the Frost Wolves. In the minors, we have the Meow Lovers versus the King's Barons, the Ferrymen against the Rockhoppers, the Lions Pride versus the Frost Foxes, the V Cat Girls versus the King's Knights, and the Serbs and Adelis in the amateurs, with the Cutie Koalas taking on the Frost Pups. So, taking a look at our week 3 matchups in the majors, what do you think is the, I guess you could say, the match of the week?
Well, I would say if it gets played, and I don't want to be any bias just because it would have my team a part of it, but we haven't got to see the Weepers or us play. We took a game off the Frost Wolves in week 1, and currently they're undefeated and at the top of the majors division. So technically, we're the only team to take a game off the number one, and we didn't get to play our week two. And then the same thing with the Reapers; they haven't got to play the week two, but also they brought in two pretty big pieces in Justin Who and Buzzinho, which we mentioned in last week's podcast. But since we didn't get to see him play week two, if we get that set be played, two major members just got added to that team that really strengthens the Reapers roster. So that should be the game of the week in the majors. I don't think I think the V Bakas and the Kings Dukes will be a pretty good game as well. See how the Dukes can rebound after losing to the Frostwolves and. Uh, I would say that the Frostwolves should have a pretty reasonable time dealing with the apes. Just they're lacking a bit of cohesion right now that apes are in the majors, and we didn't get to see them play either. So a week off at the Frostwolves being dominant in week two, getting a bunch of confidence could be a pretty difficult week to come into as the apes.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I fully agree with that assessment. I'm really looking forward to V-Bakas and Kings Dukes. But yeah, the Reapers Emperors game is going to be a good one. I expect that to be a good matchup. Switching our perspective over to the minors now. Meow Lovers, Kings Barons, Ferrymen and Rockhoppers, and Lion's Pride versus
Well,
Frost Foxes.
before
Oh,
we move on, should we give like appropriate two ones and two O's to each game?
yeah, I guess we can do that. Sure, if we want to bring back our predictions a little bit.
Oh, are we
Um,
not doing that this season? Sorry, my bad.
it's okay. No, I'm down with that. I'm always down with that. Um, but if we take a look real quick, just at how things are gonna go. I mean, expectation wise, I mean that's tough. I really like the V-Bakas to give a fight to the Kings Dukes, but I also think the Kings Dukes will rebound from this. I mean, they were 2-0'd by the Frost Foxes. They're gonna look to come back, and I mean, looking at it, I think it's going to be a 2-0 in favor of the Kings Dukes over the V-Bakas, but I think it might be close. The V-Bakas could take a game from them.
Yeah, I don't know how well the Bakas did week one against the Reapers, but that's a completely different team now, and the Reapers, I mean, instead of the Bakas. So I think there's just more consistency and more like and I agree with you. There's just more quality of work from the players with the Dukes compared to a little bit of question marks that we see from the VBaka players. I haven't got to see a lot of them personally myself. So I agree with you. I think the Dukes will find a bit of a rebound in 2-0 in week three.
Yep. All right. So the next one we're taking a look at here is the Reapers and Emperors, and I know you're involved in this one, so it's up to you if you want to give your prediction. Um, but this one, I mean, this one kind of, I gotta scratch my head a little bit on this one because I've seen the Reapers in week one play against the Bakas and did quite well, but the Bakas were able to take a game off of them. Um, and so I really like.
They got even better too because they added Justin Who and Buzzinho, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I know. I think that they're probably going to be a lot to handle. I like the. I think I like the Reapers to take this one, but I think it's going to be 2-1. I think that the Emperors played really, really well against the Frost Wolves. They were able to take a game off the Frost Wolves, and I think the Reapers might take this one 2-1, but I think that third game, that rubber match, is really going to be close, and it could go the other way. So, as much as I think the Emperors have a good shot at winning this, I think the Reapers might just edge it out because of that new firepower that they brought in.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm not. Well, I didn't say it, but I'm not gonna really speak in terms of because obviously I'm biased. But I expect it to be a hard set. I think they're a really good team. I think, uh, like I said, just shortening from 8 to 6 has really made the majors a lot more competitive, 1 through 6, and not no game is really just a free step for anyone. And so I expect it to be a really, really good game, and I agree with you. If it goes to a game 3, it's really on a knife's edge on who could really win.
Yeah, and then of course we have the third game, the Apes and the Frost Wolves. I I I think the Apes still aren't quite together well enough at this point. I think they do have good potential. I just think the Frost Wolves are doing really well right now, and I think they're going to take this one 2-0.
Yeah, Frostwolves are just playing right now at the best level right now in the majors, in my opinion. And the Apes have already struggled in week 1. And they have a decent roster, but I think they have a clear weakness in terms of their duo lane's a bit weaker on paper compared to a lot of people. I think Omar Dragon and Moji can pull together and maybe take a game, but I don't really see it happening. And I think how the Frostwolves dealt with the Dukes last week, I think it will be another 2-0 for the Frostwolves.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. I think the Frost Wolves take this one. Okay, let's shift over to the minors now. Meow Lovers and King's Barons. I think I'm gonna have to say I'm not gonna do this one
Because it got
because
played.
this one already got played and I already know the result on this one. I will say this one was such a good game to watch. It was such a good game. I think I casted this one actually, and I enjoyed watching every minute of this one. So even if you're watching or listening to the podcast right now, go back, watch this game. I know it's on Twitch. It should be up on YouTube shortly after the podcast. I think Saturday maybe it's getting uploaded. Maybe Friday, maybe Saturday it's getting uploaded, but it should be up by the end of the week. And this was such a good game to watch. But okay, game number 2 then. Ferryman and Rockhoppers. This one I think is a lot closer on paper than it actually will be. Just taking a look, I mean, the Ferrymen have a good lineup, and the Rockhoppers have a decent lineup, but I just see the Ferrymen having way too much firepower right now in terms of team cohesion because they have players that have played together. I don't think the Rockhoppers have gelled yet. I think they need probably one more week to get together a little bit closer, and I think then they can kind of vie a little bit more. But I'm going to give this one 2-0 to the Ferryman.
Yeah, and I'm gonna follow suit right after you. I think that's a 2-0 for the Ferrymen, and not that the Rockhoppers don't have the talent to be able to compete, but it's a much different feeling coming off of a win like the Ferrymen just did, and coming off of a loss that it's gonna be tough if you're gonna make a turnaround week to do it against a team that just won that also might be a little bit better coordinated than you too. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it should be a pretty good set. I wouldn't be surprised if it went 2-1. But I think the Ferrymen, if they take game number 1, it will just end up being a 2-1. I'm sorry, a 2-0 for the Ferrymen. I think if the Rockhoppers do take a game, it has to be game 1.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Um, so game 3 of the minors is Lions Pride against Frost Foxes. I think with the switch up that happened with the Lions Pride, Chaos coming down, kind of they have to get familiar again, and I think that's really going to play a detriment. I think the Frost Foxes take this one 2-0 against the Lions Pride. They just looked way too good last week. I think they're going to look good again this week, and I think the Lions Pride with that shakeup is not going to be playing at optimal performance, so I'm giving it to the Frost Foxes.
Yeah, and I think the Frost Foxes need to not the Frost Foxes. The Lions Pride they need to do a bit of better job and a bit of discussion on where players need to be and where the front line needs to be appropriately. I think we might see Peaceful Mind just pop off in this set. I think these teams are a bit closer compared to the game that they had to play last week against the Ferrymen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think Peaceful Mind might just be able to take over this set. and at least get one game for them. But overall, it could really be anybody. But I think the Frostfrock win this one 2-1. I think Peaceful Mind brings out one of his weird picks that can do a bunch of damage, but they aren't coordinated enough to actually kill him like the Ferrymen were.
Yeah, I completely agree on that one. All right. Now switching up to the last 3 games of the week, we have the amateurs between the VCAT girls, the Kings and the Kings Knights, the Serbs against the Adelis, and the Cutie Koalas facing off against the Frost Pups. So game number 1, the VCAT girls against the Kings Knights. Oh man, this one is such a tough one for me to even put out there. Um, Actually, let me double check. I think this one might have been played as well. Give me 2 seconds to figure this one out. Yes, this one's already been played, so I know the results on this one, and I am going to just let it slide, because this one's already been played by the time of recording here.
We don't give spoilers out here on the podcast.
Nope, no spoilers here. So looking at week 3, game 2 in the amateurs, it's the Serbs and the Adelis. This one I think is going to be very, very close. The Serbs are okay, pretty good. The Adelis kind of gelling together, but I know they have some individual talent. I'm going to give this one to the Adelis 2-1. I think the Serbs have the better team fight, but I think the Adelis have good individual talent. I think it finally comes together for them, and I think they play really well. So I'm going to go Adelis 2-1, although I could very easily give this one to the Serbs 2-1 as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna be on the other side of that. I think it's gonna take one more week really for the delis to come together. I think it's gonna be pretty close, but I think the Serbs might be able to take this one 2-1 over the delis. And continue a little bit on their win streak after beating the Koalas. So hopefully just keep climbing up in those amateur positions on that leaderboard. Well, not the
Mm-hmm.
leaderboard, but I guess the whatever it's called. You know what I'm talking about. But
Standings, rankings,
yeah,
yeah.
on the standings, rankings. But I think the subs will be able to take this one 2-1. I think the Adelis find their first game win of the season,
Mm-hmm.
so that will be good. And then they might be able to bounce back in season 4. Haven't really looked at what their season 4 matchup is, but I think it's going to take them one more week, and I think the subs have this one 2-1.
Okay, and then the last game of the week, it's the Cutie Koalas versus the Frost Pups. I'm going to recuse myself because I am part of one of the teams here. I'm probably not going to get to play this one. But, yeah, interestingly here, Frost Pup's going through a bit of a shakeup. They take their minors captain, bring him down, becomes part of the amateurs. And the same thing with the Cutie Koalas, bring the minors captain down, now becomes part of the amateurs. Who do you like?
Would be wrong to say I wouldn't like the Frost Pups right now, but also I think the Cutie Koalas, like you said, if you guys have all your starters, you guys could play a pretty good set. I think this is another set that's super close. I think it's much more closer than the Delis versus the Serbs. Um, if I would have to say, just because I would go 2-1 for the Frost Pups, but I wouldn't be surprised to see you guys pull out a win 2-1. I think it goes to 3 games, nonetheless, though.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I don't know how it's going to go. And in
But we'll
fact, I
find
think
out.
yeah, in fact, I think there's talk it might even get rescheduled, so we'll see. But that's a topic for the next week's podcast. But I want to thank my special guest Justen with me tonight. This is Redsniper 23. Um, any last words of wisdom for the listeners, Justen?
Um, Shout out to Tuxley, the org owner. Hopefully he's doing well. Shout out to my team, and shout out to the QSL and to you, Red Sniper, for having me here on the podcast tonight.
Yeah, no problem, man. So again, thank you guys for listening to another episode of the QSL podcast. This has been Justen and Redsniper 23. Thank you guys. Have a good night, and we'll see you next week on the QSL podcast. Oh, and one more thing. Be listening out, because the next edition of the special episodes where I interview the org owners coming up again this week. So until then, I'll see you later. Have a good night and keep playing Smite. Bye-bye.